Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, bumoto po ako ng yes dahil pinabababa ng amendment ng Republic Act 11235, Motorcycle Crime Prevention Act, ang mga multa at parusa sa mga riders na lalabag sa batas na ito. Ganun pa man, Mr. Speaker, ang representasyong ito ay nananatiling tumututol sa kabuuan ng Motorcycle Crime Prevention Act na kung saan ang isa sa mga author ng amendment nito ay isa rin sa mga pumirma ng batas na ito, Senator J.B. Ejercito. Nabanggit ko po ito, Mr. Speaker, dahil nabasa ko po ang post ni Senator J.B. Ejercito sa Facebook na sinasabi niya sa riding community na baka kailangang kalampagin ang mga kinatawan sa House of Representatives dahil ilang buwan na nilang naipasa sa Senado ang amendment ng Motorcycle Crime Prevention Act o Doble Plaka Law. Mr. Speaker, nananatiling tumututol ang representasyong ito sa Republic Act 11235, Motorcycle Crime Prevention Act, sapagkat ang batas na ito ay nagdudulot ng diskriminasyon sa hanay ng mga motorcycle riders sa Luzon, Visayas at Mindanao. Malinaw na patunay po dito, Mr. Speaker, ang amendment na nakasaad sa Section 5 ng House version at Section 6 ng Senate version na parehong nagsasabing erasing, tampering, forging, imitating, covering, or concealing a number plate or readable number plate in intentional use thereof shall be punished by imprisonment ranging from 2 years and 1 day to 6 years and a fine of not more than 10,000 pesos. Ang probisyong ito po, Mr. Speaker, ay nagpapataw ng parusa sa mga riders sa mga nabanggit na paglabag sa plaka ng motorsiklo ng pagkakakulong na 2 taon hanggang 6 na taon at multa na 10,000 piso. Samantalang, Mr. Speaker, ang mga motorista na gumagamit ng 4-wheel vehicles at iba pang mga sasakyan na may kaparehong paglabag ng mga riders sa paggamit ng plaka ay walang batas na nagpapataw ng parusang kulong at pinagmumulta lamang sila ng 5,000 piso. Napakabigat po nito para sa mga maliliit na manggagawa na gumagamit ng motorsiklo. Ang parusang pagkakakulong ng 2 taon hanggang 6 na taon, lalo pa at walang kakayahan ang mga ito para ipagtanggol ang kanilang mga sarili. Yan po, Mr. Speaker, ang malinaw na patunay na ang Republic Act 11235, Motorcycle Crime Prevention Act, ay nagdudulot ng malaking pasakit at diskriminasyon sa hanay ng mga riders sa Luzon, Visayas at Mindanao. Maraming salamat po, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Congressman Busita.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I stand before you today to address matters of utmost importance that touches the integrity and accountability of our public financial system, the need to establish clear and stringent standards for the regulation of special disbursing officers, and the need for a law that clearly defines confidential funds, prescribing stricter requirements and guidelines in the utilization thereof. As we all know, the proper management of public funds is not just an issue of policy. Rather, it is an issue of national interest. Ang bawat piso po ay nanggagaling mula sa pinaghirapan at pinagpaguran ng mamamayang Pilipino. Bilang mga miyembro ng labing-siyam na Kongreso ng Pilipinas, kinakailangan po nating masiguro na ang public funds, including confidential funds, ay ginagastos ng ayon sa batas. This statement, Mr. Chair, may be anchored with Article 11, Section 1 of the 1987 Constitution, which mandates that public office is a public trust. On the other hand, Mr. Speaker, confidential funds have historically served as an essential instrument for the government in addressing matters that necessitate discretion, secrecy, and security. Such funds are imperative to ensure that the government possesses the necessary resources to protect the nation, safeguard its citizens, and preserve public order in the circumstances that demand confidentiality. However, Mr. Speaker, esteemed colleagues, while the importance of confidential funds is indisputable, we must also recognize the need to strike a delicate balance, one that maintains the integrity of our public financial system while safeguarding the people's trust in the government. These funds, by their very nature, are subject to strict scrutiny and concern. Our legal system enshrines the principle that procedural laws must align with substantive law, ensuring that rules are applied consistently with the fundamental objectives and values of our legal framework. However, there is currently no specific substantive law governing the creation, allocation, and use of confidential funds. Instead, Mr. Speaker, we rely on Joint Circular number 2015-01 issued by the Commission on Audit, which, while providing guidelines, is merely a procedural measure. It has become a common practice to allocate these funds, yet no substantive law clearly defines their scope or purpose. The only substantive law available is the constitutional mandate that all public funds are subject to public scrutiny. It is crucial to understand, as highlighted by legal experts, that procedural laws cannot function independently. They must be grounded on substantive law. Consequently, while COA's Joint Circular number 2015-01 serves as an operational guideline, it cannot replace a comprehensive law that clearly defines and governs confidential funds. In this regard, Mr. Speaker, esteemed colleagues, I echo the words of retired Supreme Court Associate Justice Antonio Carpio, who aptly pointed out that we lack clear and comprehensive legislation that properly defines and regulates confidential funds. Thus, Mr. Speaker, it has become incumbent upon this representation that while we provide the government with the necessary resources for national security through these confidential funds, we need to have a law that clearly defines these funds that shall be the basis of the imposition of strict and transparent guidelines to prevent the misuse, abuse, or neglect of the same. During the committee hearing investigations, we have established that there are gaps with regard to what encompasses confidential funds. It was shown that those who wield the power to disburse or approve of the same tends to abuse, misuse, or neglect. It is essential that we implement a unified framework for the disbursement of public funds, covering both confidential and even regular funds. This framework should include clear disbursement procedures, qualifications of special disbursing officers, and penalties for violations. Whether intentional or due to negligence, Mr. Speaker, there must be sufficient fidelity bond for the SDOs that will ensure that they will perform their duties faithfully and to account for all funds and properties in their possession. The SDOs and their agency heads must be jointly accountable for any mismanagement of funds. To emphasize, Mr. Speaker, esteemed colleagues, we must pass a law which, number one, defines confidential fund. Number two, provides disbursement procedure. Number three, provides auditing procedure. And number four, penalizes abuse, misuse, and neglect of the same. Equally important, Mr. Speaker, we must pass a law which, number one, upgrades the qualification of special disbursing officer. He or she must be a career official. And number two, mandates the posting of sufficient fidelity bond, which is enough to secure and to protect the total amount of public funds. Mr. Speaker, this power clearly rests with us, the Congress of the Philippines. It is incumbent upon this body to exercise its legislative authority to craft a law that will not only recognize confidential funds, but also set clear standards for their use, allocation, and even oversight. As lawmakers, it is our duty to ensure that these funds are utilized in a manner that is consistent with the public's interest and transparent to the extent possible without compromising the sensitivity of their intended purpose. In closing, Mr. Speaker, let us act urgently to implement the necessary legal chances that will safeguard public funds and ensure the government's confidential operations are effective, transparent, and accountable. Strengthening our financial systems will protect the public's hard-earned money and help build a more transparent and efficient government for the Filipino people. Mr. Speaker, this privileged speech is being delivered by this representation in anticipation of the bills on confidential fund and special disbursing officer, which will soon be filed by the Committee on Good Government. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Congresswoman Luistro. And as a side note, this representation, Congresswoman Luistro, would like to be a co-author of the bills and measures that will be filed by your committee? Thank you very much for the privileged speech. Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move that we refer the speech of the Honorable Jervil Luistro to the Committee on Rules for its appropriate action.
Are there any objections? The Chair hears none. The privileged speech is hereby transmitted to the Committee on Rules for her explanation of her vote. Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move to recognize the Honorable Franz Castro to explain her vote.
The Party List Act, the Honorable Franz Castro is hereby recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Bumoboto ng no ang representasyong ito mula sa ACT Teachers Party List sa House Bill 11072. Narinig natin sa committee ang mariing oposisyon ng Northern Davao Electric Cooperative Incorporated o Nordeco. Kung aprobahan natin ang panukalang ito, bibigyang daan natin ang paglamon ng oligarko sa maliliit na players sa kapinsalaan ng mamamayan. Lalamunin ng Davao Light and Power Company o DLPC ang malaking bahagi ng franchise area ng Nordeco. May higit na 80,000 residential consumers sa Tagum, Island Garden City of Samal, New Corella, San Isidro, Talaingod at munisipyo ng Maco at ang mga households na narito ay mawawalan ng maasahang kuryente at government subsidy dahil sa bill na ito. Alam naman natin ang privatization na ang mapagkakatiwalaan lamang ito pagdating sa pagtaas ng electricity bill at hindi sa serbisyo. Sa pinakabuod ng House Bill 11072, aabandonahin ng pamahalaan ang mandato nito na Total Electrification Program by 2028. At para saan? Accommodation, pabor sa malalaking oligarch na sa 100 taong existence nito, may malaking bahagi pa ng Davao ang hindi nito kinayang bigyan ng kuryente. Samantala, sa 53 years of existence ng much smaller player na kooperatibang Nordeco, tagumpay nitong binigyang kuryente ang 77.58% households ng kanyang franchise area. Malaking paglabag dito sa konstitusyon ang House Bill 11072, particular ang principle of mutuality of obligation of contracts, deprivation of property without due process, at limitadong kapangyarihan ng gobyerno sa eminent domain. Confiscation of property ang gagawin natin sa Nordeco dahil tatanggalan natin sila ng mga sinisilbihang franchise area at ibibigay sa DLPC ng walang due process at walang just compensation. Isa pa, Mr. Speaker, masamang president ito sa lahat, para sa lahat ng mga maliliit na electric cooperatives sa buong bansa. Bakit natin i-dissolve ang electric co-op na nagpapakitang ginagampanan ng ang kanyang trabaho at tumutulong sa gobyerno sa layuning total electrification? Bakit natin ibibigay sa higanting korporasyon na hindi mapapagkatiwala ang record? Dahil sa mga kadahilanang ito, Mr. Speaker, bumoboto ang kinatawang ito ng no sa House Bill 11072.
Thank you, Congresswoman Franz Castro, for your explanation of your vote. Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker,
Yes, what is the pleasure of the Congresswoman B.H. Herrera?
Mr. Speaker, I rise on the point of personal and collective privilege.
Right? Go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, gusto ko lang pong magpasalamat sa buong pamunuan ng Department of Foreign Affairs or Philippine Embassy in Rome. Dahil nung ako po ay naaksidente sa streets of Rome on November 12, 2024, ay nung ako'y dinala ng ambulansya hanggang sa ospital, bawal po ang family member. At wala pong nakakaintindi sa akin kahit isa. Kaya agad-agad nag-text po ako kay Protocol Officer Donna Feliciano Gatmaytan and told her that I needed a translator. And immediately, pinuntahan po ako at may madre pong lumapit sa akin, si Sister Josephine Giganto. And I'd like to put on record my thanks kasi inalagaan po talaga nila ako hanggang sa makalabas po ako ng ospital. At nung lumabas po ako ng ospital, nandoon po si Conjen Randy Arquiza, kasama po si Deputy Chief of Mission Nina Kainglet, at si Rodelyn Ruales, at si Marleth Cruz Siman. Nagulat po talaga ako at I'm very proud to be a Filipino, Mr. Speaker, dahil yung sister po, si Sister Josephine who took care of me, very popular po siya doon sa buong ospital. Lahat ng doktor, niyayakap siya, nagpapasalamat sa kanya, at lahat ng tumulong po sa akin doon ay puro mga Pilipino doon po sa ospital ng Rome. Yun lamang po, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to also thank Secretary Enrique Manalo through Chief Coordinator Bernadette Fernandez, who all assisted me during those trying times. And I'd like to special thanks also to Ambassador Myla Kahilig, ang ating Ambassador of the Vatican, at kay Vice Consul Sandra Giang, who also made special arrangements para kami po ay makapagmano kay Pope. Yun lamang po, Mr. Speaker. Again, gusto ko pong magpasalamat sa pamunuan ng Department of Foreign Affairs led by Conjen Arquiza ng Rome, Italy. Maraming salamat, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Madam B.H. Herrera, our Congresswoman from Party List BH. And we certainly join you in your, of course, thanking the Department of Foreign Affairs, especially the embassy in Rome, in Italy, for their assistance, not only to you, but to all of our Filipino brethren who are there abroad. Open debate is hereby open. Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the chairperson of the Committee on Trade and Industry, the Honorable Reginald Biron of the 4th District of Iloilo, be recognized to begin sponsorship of the said measure.
My good friend, Congressman Biron, is hereby recognized to sponsor this bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker and my distinguished colleagues, as chairman of the Committee on Trade and Industry, I have the honor and privilege to sponsor House Bill number 10755, entitled An Act Liberalizing the Lease of Lands by Foreign Investors, Establishing the Stability of Long-Term Lease Contracts, amending for the purpose Republic Act number 7652, otherwise known as the Investors Lease Act. With amendments and in consolidation with House Bills number 10750, 10802, and 11025 as per committee report number 1297. House Bill number 10755 seeks to update and enhance certain provisions of the 3-decade-old Investors Lease Act, which was signed into law in June 1993 in order to promote the Philippines as a top investment destination, encourage investors to engage in strategic investments, and ensure that the country's regulatory environment is conducive to business operations. By relaxing existing land lease policies, the proposed amendments to Republic Act number 7652 aim to attract more foreign investors, foster economic growth, create jobs, and improve the overall investment climate in the country. Likewise, the amendments aim to recognize and acknowledge the indispensability of property rights, namely user and income rights in the formation and accumulation of capital. These property rights are transferred from the landowner to the tenant in the land lease arrangement. In particular, House Bill number 10755 strives to liberalize and establish greater reliability and predictability in the long-term lease of private lands by foreign investors by extending the aggregate period prescribed by Republic Act number 7652 from 75 years to 99 years. In the course of our deliberations, the Committee on Trade and Industry was able to validate the existence of a demand for longer lease terms from our existing investors. Within the ASEAN, Thailand is heading in the same direction as it now moves to extend its maximum lease period from 30 years to 99 years in its bid to become more competitive. Allowing longer lease terms for foreign investors will attract more capital-intensive investments with longer gestation periods and enduring impact on our economy. This is particularly relevant given the administration's current emphasis on energy infrastructure, which requires long-term capital-intensive outlays. Another adjustment to Republic Act 7652 will allow foreign investors to collateralize the long-term lease contract to secure a loan. Likewise, leaseholders shall be permitted to sublet the leased land. These rights provide businesses with increased liquidity to support borrowing, investing, and expansion. Furthermore, the bill protects the rights of foreign leaseholders as it subjects lease agreements to the approval of the Department of Trade and Industry, Board of Investments, and relevant promotion agencies. The same approval process allows the DTI BOI and the concerned investment promotion agency to verify the validity of documents submitted by investors, which include establishing the authenticity of the title. By extending leasehold terms and simplifying regulations, the country could attract more FDIs and create more economic benefits. My esteemed colleagues, the need to enact the proposed amendments to Republic Act number 7652 is urgent, considering that the Philippines needs to catch up with its neighbors in attracting foreign direct investments. In the last 10 years, and with the escalating level of competition for external capital, our country has not been able to generate as much FDIs compared to our neighbors. While Indonesia registered an average of 19.4 billion US dollars and Vietnam wound up with 14.7 billion US dollars, the Philippines recorded only 8.6 billion US dollars in foreign direct investments. Furthermore, we need more capital inflows because our economy has not been growing at a pace that would generate enough revenues to fund our infrastructure and basic services. At 4.8%, our average GDP growth from 2014 to 2023 has been doing well. However, comparative data suggests that our economy could still do better, given that Vietnam grew by 6.1%. Mr. Speaker, my dear colleagues, in the light of the foregoing, I humbly submit House Bill number 10755 for the immediate consideration and approval by this august chamber. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. From the Congressman from the 4th District of Iloilo, the Honorable Ferdinand G. Biron, for his sponsorship of House Bill 10755. Majority from the 2nd District of Cagayan de Oro, Congressman Rufus Rodriguez, the future senator, is hereby recognized.
Thank you, Majority Leader. Thank you, our distinguished speaker. Would the distinguished sponsor allow this representation for some interventions in relation to this proposed measure?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, my pleasure.
Thank you.
Rodriguez.
Proceed.
Sponsor, Chair Beron. First, would you agree that the Congress, the House of Representatives, have passed bills and resolutions to amend the economic provisions of our 1987 Constitution.
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
And don't you also agree that all of this resolution and this bill that would propose amendments to the economic provisions of the Constitution have not been acted upon by the Senate? Do you agree with that?
I agree, Mr. Speaker.
So in view of the inaction of the Senate of the Republic of the Philippines, would you agree that this certainly will be the best alternative measure to be able to invite more foreign investments in our country?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, considering that the Senate has not acted on any of our measures, this is the best compromise that we can offer to the Filipino people.
So, in other words, if we will not be able to approve this, increasing the number of years of the lease to 99 years, we will be missing the boat, so to speak, because other countries in ASEAN are certainly more open because they have no constitutional provisions limiting ownership in certain fields of investment. Don't you agree, Mr. Speaker?
That is
Distinguished
correct,
colleague.
Mr. Speaker.
So, Mr. Speaker, I would therefore state that this representation is in full support, and this could also be being an author, could also be an additional sponsorship speech, because I believe, Mr. Speaker, that this is overdue to be able to overcome the fact that there is limited foreign investments in our country. And that is why I urge our distinguished colleagues of this august chamber to favorably act on this. And in the proper time, Mr. Speaker, I would like to therefore just state to our chairman and sponsor that let us increase the coverage of this 99-year lease, as this would invite more investors. And at the proper time, I would ask our sponsor to consider two amendments to include in the coverage of this bill, to include agroforestry. Agroforestry will be different from agriculture as stated in the bill. And the second one, which at the proper time I will move in the individual amendments stage, will be ecological preservation. By adding these two, Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague, would you be minded in the proper time to consider this as a further amendment to allow more investments in agroforestry and more investments in ecological preservation, Mr. Speaker?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. In principle, I agree to include those amendments as proposed by Congressman Rodriguez.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Thank you to our distinguished colleague, another debonair chairman, and of course, the most debonair here is the Deputy Speaker, our presiding speaker. So thank you very much for the opportunity, and after interpellation period, after committee amendments, then individual amendments, this representation will rise to present, not only to support it, but to present an amendment to add two more areas of investment, agroforestry and ecological preservation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And before that, this is also requested by the Federation for Economic Freedom of Mr. Toti Chicamco requesting this representation. And I find it to be opportune, and it will be very much to strengthen this bill. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman Rufus Rodriguez, for your interpellations.